Lollie Bohannon and her partner, John Freiling, moved to St. Simon's Island in the summer of 2015, exactly 70 years after Lollie's first visit to the island when she said, "I am going to move here." The realities of life made her postpone that early plan. She lived in 6 states and reared a family of 3 children with her late husband while waiting for that move. She taught middle school math, both in general ed and the Gifted Center in Fairfax County, Virginia, where she was also a part of a teacher evaluation team for the county. She held elected positions within her fraternity, where she worked to provide leadership training for officers of collegiate and alumni groups. She has attended UU churches wherever she lived, and she and John make it a point to attend local UU congregations when they travel. Lollie has pursued genealogy whenever time allowed during most of her life, and shares this hobby with us today as she presents Genealogy, a spiritual practice. Now, we're going to take a minute, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Lollie is going to share hers. All right, Lollie, go for it.
I think I'm disabled.
Oh, let me, you don't, it says one, you can't see my screen anymore, can you?
No. Beth, you have to make Lollie host so that she can share her screen.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. All right, go ahead now. See if you can.
Yes.
All right.
Got it?
Perfect.
Oh, well, I didn't have to be perfect, but we have spoken of building our beloved community during Sunday services this past year as we gathered together in our sanctuaries, and we continued as we met within the greater UU community while we hunkered down in our separate homes, communicating through electronic means like Zoom on devices unknown in years past. I think of our beloved enlarged UU community as horizontal, one reaching out all around us to include those with whom we share so many values and those with whom we work to build a better world in their own way. Ah, yes, I feel so successful. Forgive me for interrupting. But we each share a heritage with our ancestors as well, and I think of that as my vertical community. My interest in becoming a part of that beloved community began nearly 70 years ago when I became a collector of family stories that now span the ages. Who were those ancestors who had gone before, those with whom I share a heritage but have never met? Did they share those same values with us, hoping to build a better world in their own way? The surest way to know ancestors is to have met them during our lifetimes. My childhood was spent in a 3-generation home with my mother and both of her parents in Decatur, Georgia. I formed my personal values as my family discussed such things as economics, politics, literature, religion, and events of the day. We discussed religion, and it was discussed in the same way as any other academic topic. It was respected as a belief held by friends and others. The news of the day informed us hourly. At 5 minutes before the hour, the radio was often turned on to present news broadcasts. And oftentimes, we repeated it at various times during the day, just to see if events had changed. We were tuned into reality, things as they are, truth, honesty, science and its proofs, facts, and reality. These were important, and I felt comfortable embracing these values of honesty and a search for truth that I saw modeled by my mother and grandparents. It was also who I was. In the summers of my 3rd, 4th, and 5th years of life, my grandmother took me to Bloomington, Indiana, where we lived with her mother, while my grandmother pursued her master's degree in English literature, studying the works of Catherine Mansfield. My grandmother's aunts, uncles, and several cousins lived nearby. The kinship was strong, despite the wide age spans, and I sat close within this tribe, well past bedtime many nights, listening to their shared stories and knowing that their tales were my family lore. I hold close those stories, the sounds of life in my great-grandmother's home, the smell of oats in her pantry, and the sights of their busy lives in a small college town. And so it was that I began a passion for determining what my ancestors had been like. What lives had they led? Had they shared similar values? I still have a handwritten chart drawn up with empty lines for those names that were unknown to me. Her responses provided the beginning of 6 generations of that line. My passion has sometimes taken a back seat to the constraints of both time and financial resources. Throughout the years, however, I have accumulated records of over 7,000 people from 17 countries and 39 states. These records now include the miracle of DNA evidence linking thousands of ancestors back through the 1500s in proven links and farther back in links that lack common DNA information. The Ancestor.com site identifies through lines that use past records to suggest how I might be related to my DNA matches through common ancestors. Testing reveals that my 5 grandsons share from 19 to 33% of my own DNA. Although there is no way to know precisely what I share from past generations, it can identify others who are their descendants through our own shared DNA characteristics. We are the stuff of our ancestors and those who have touched our souls along the way. My introduction to my great-grandfather, John Rubel, came quite accidentally while sorting out several family documents a favorite cousin had sent. John Rubel is the name of my father and my brother, as well as that in many generations since the 1500s, and for all I know, maybe before that. So one more relative of the same name didn't really arouse much curiosity at first. In one of the papers, however, he described his journey through the Elk Valley of Tennessee, and I realized that he, on foot, and I, in my red convertible, had very likely traveled the same trails in a state in which neither of us lived. His journey had been in the company of hundreds of other Union soldiers on dusty wagon paths forged by Cherokee Indians and European settlers. My own annual journeys followed years later along paved ribbons of highway in a convoy of other travelers seeking ways to celebrate the Memorial Day holiday, a time for honoring those who had died fighting for our country. How did this man live? Was he an educated professional? Or was he, as most in this day, a farmer? And if he farmed, did he own property, or did he toil on land belonging to others? And how do we determine what a man stands for? By simply reading documents. I knew little about my father's lineage beyond the paternal grandparents and that little handwritten chart of years in past. But picturing the two of us, my great-grandfather and I, traveling the same route, one a soldier who had dropped the threads of his life to serve his country in a time of incredible civil disorder, and the other, 140 years later, off to an annual 3-day party of no importance at all except to the partygoers. I felt a sense of gratitude to this elder John. I wanted to get to know him, to talk to him, to learn what he was like, to learn his story. And so the search began. John was one of 10 children born to another John Rubel and Nancy Tillett in Indiana in 1825. His parents were married in Virginia and traveled by river to the new territory of Indiana that had opened after the War of 1812. They settled on land in the southeast corner of Indiana, where father and sons worked the family farm. Young John's father died when the boy was just 16, and his mother followed 3 months later. I found her obituary that I'll show to you in a minute. In the Western Christian Advocate stored in the vertical stacks at DePaul University Library, Greencastle, Indiana. It reported that she had known hardships, but did not give the details. Nancy Rubel, a mother in Israel, on Manchester Circuit, exchanged worlds on the 13th of February, 1842. Wholly devoted to Christ, faithful in the discharge of religious duties, and exemplary in conduct, she lived an ornament to the church and died as the righteous die. Her life was one of great tribulation, but her end was that of holy triumph. T.A. Goodwin, Manchester, 15 March, 1842. Knowing that he served in the Union Army, I sought information stored in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. I unearthed a treasure trove of information. He received a pension for the rest of his life following the Civil War due to an injury, and the records of his annual physical exams by a physician were filed there, along with his military service records. I learned his weight, height, color of his hair and eyes, even his blood pressure. A muscular build and 6 feet in stature with dark auburn hair and brown eyes, my own father may have looked a bit like his grandfather. Family records told me that on 28 November, he married Lydia Courtwright, who was 16. They remained childless until June 1860, when daughter Hattie was born into a country now deeply divided. And daughter Carrie was born August 1862, but the divisions of the country had already changed the lives of this little family. I will read to you now the script of a History Channel program from 2009. As early as 1858, the ongoing conflict between North and South over the issue of slavery had led Southern leadership to discuss a unified separation from the United States. By 1860, the majority of the slave states were publicly threatening secession if the Republicans, the anti-slavery party, won the presidency. Following Republican Abraham Lincoln's victory over a divided Democrat Party in November 1860, South Carolina immediately initiated secession proceedings. On December 20, 1860, the South Carolina legislature passed the Ordinance of Secession, which declared that the union now subsisting between South Carolina and other states under the name of the United States of America is hereby dissolved. After that declaration, South Carolina set about seizing forts, arsenals, and other strategic locations within the state. 4 southern states, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, followed South Carolina's lead. The southern states convened in February 1861 to establish a government and elected Jefferson Davis as president. By the time President Lincoln was inaugurated on March 4, Texas had joined the other southern states. On April 12, the Confederates opened fire on federally controlled Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And on April 13th, U.S. Major Robert Anderson surrendered the fort. 2 days later, President Abraham Lincoln issued a proclamation calling for 75,000 volunteer soldiers to quell the Southern insurrection. And so America was at war with itself. John Rubel enlisted from Mission Township, LaSalle County, Illinois, in July 1862 at the call of President Lincoln for 800,000 volunteers to put down what he now called the Southern Rebellion. And John was mustered into Company G, the 104th Regiment Illinois Volunteers in Ottawa, Illinois, on 27, 1862, shortly after daughter Carrie was born. The group was mustered in at the Ottawa Fairgrounds. The ladies of the town presented a silken 34-star flag of our country to this unit that was about to take off for training and battle. We're not sure if this flag pictured is the exact flag that was presented, because there was more than one made, of course, and sometimes they lost it in battle. But this is certainly the same, similar flag, not the same necessarily. The men marched in their personal civilian clothing for about 3 weeks until they reached Camp Holt near Louisville, Kentucky, where they received uniforms and weapons in mid-September. They trained for a month before beginning their first mission, the capture of rebel General Bragg. Within a few weeks, these inexperienced troops had been captured in Tennessee, where they were later paroled. However, their commanding officers were sent to the infamous Libby Prison in Richmond. This building was located, it's no longer in existence, down in Shockoe Slip near the James River, and had been used as a warehouse for food that had come in on the river. It was stacked with captured Union prisoners. And when they slept at night, they really had to spoon. It was a disgraceful prison, as were so many of them, I suppose. After being paroled, the rest of the 104th was sent to Camp Douglas in Chicago to guard rebel prisoners. They remained there for over a year when they were exchanged and their commanders paroled from Libby Prison. On June 7, 1863, the regiment and their commanders joined the Army of the Cumberland in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Sergeant Rubel was the flag bearer. He carried it proudly at the forefront of the company as they embarked on the Tullahoma campaign, marched through the Elk Valley, crossing the Elk River more than once, facing several skirmishes along the way, and on to Deckard, where they made camp. In mid-August, the Union forces advanced toward the Cumberland Mountains in the Chickamauga campaign. The 104th was heavily engaged in this battle, but the Union Army was forced to retreat, holding a defensive position outside Chattanooga. As a matter of fact, the war had not gone well for the Union troops up to this point. They had totally underestimated the abilities of the rebel forces in those early years. But things were about to change. On 23 November 1863, Union forces began the advance through the outskirts of Chattanooga. The 104th took part in the taking of Lookout Mountain and is said to have been the first to have planted its flag on Missionary Ridge 2 days later. The regiment remained in Chattanooga until February 1864. In May of that year, they joined General Sherman's Atlanta campaign and the March to the Sea. General Sherman's strategy was that of total war. It was designed to break the will of the Confederates and bring an end to this conflict. I read General Sherman's words now. This was from an October 2018 article published by the History Channel. We must war upon and destroy the organized rebel forces. We must cut off all supplies, destroy their communications, and produce among the people of Georgia a thorough conviction of the personal misery which attends war and the utter helplessness and inability of their rulers to protect them. If that terror and grief and even want shall help to paralyze their husbands and fathers who are fighting us, it is mercy in the end. General William Tecumseh Sherman. The battles that followed are familiar names to Georgians: Rocky Face, Resaca, New Hope Church, Altoona Hills, Pine Mountain, and Kennesaw. The regiment took heavy losses in the Battle of Peachtree Creek and Howell Mills, a site actually at Utoy Creek, and roughly where Six Flags Over Georgia sits now. Half of the men in 5 companies were killed or wounded, Sergeant Rubel took a musket ball to the right jaw. I read from the record now. A musket ball entered the right side of his face, just forward of the ear, severing an artery, fracturing the jaw, injuring the tongue, and knocking out several teeth. It was only by prompt action on the part of the regimental doctor, Dr. Dyer, and others that his life was spared. At the time of receiving his wound, he was color sergeant, and wherever the flag went, the boys followed. This was a picture taken very late in life, and it shows the right side of his face and the results of the injury. My Aunt Dorothy remembered tweaking his beard while sitting on his lap. She was not allowed to sit on his lap again, and later in life, she realized that the incident had caused him pain. The musket ball remained where it lodged until he returned to Illinois after the war, and I understand a cousin in California has it now. To me, that sounds a little ghoulish, but I guess it's a trophy. Sergeant Rubel continued on with the 104th to Atlanta and on to the sea, serving now as their cook. The regiment continued up through the Carolinas, Virginia, and to DC, where the regiment marched in the Grand Review. On the 23rd and the 24th of May, as they traveled throughout the city. His military career was nearly 3 years' duration. He was just discharged June 6, 1865, in Washington, D.C. This is a Matthew Brady photograph of the Grand Review of the armies marching down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol building that you see in the central part there in the back. And they are going past the Treasury building and the reviewing stand of dignitaries. And it was taken on the 23rd, the first day of 1865, May, 1 month after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. Viewers included President Andrew Johnson. The regiment lost a total of 194 men during service in the Civil War, 6 officers and 110 enlisted men killed or mortally wounded. 2 officers and 76 enlisted men died of disease, which was another prevalent cause during the Civil War death. The 1860 census enumerates the U.S. population at just under 32 million. War casualties numbered 1,032,000, with 655,000 of that number fatalities. My grandfather's brother, Jephthah, served with the 16th Infantry Regiment, Indiana, and did not return home to his family. He died during a battle at Napoleon, Arkansas, 18 January 1863. His brother Leander served in the 11th Regiment Kentucky Volunteer Cavalry and did not return home to his family. He died a prisoner of war at Andersonville, Georgia, 19 May 1864. At his funeral in 1911, it was said of John Rubel that as cook, he never ate until all the men had been fed. It is humbling to think of this simple man and his commitment to building a better world during a brief snapshot in time. We are all the stuff of the universe, just as were our ancestors, and our values were passed on one generation at a time to us. We may become discouraged as the progress of this passage skips a beat from time to time, or continues slowly in other cases. But social justice did not start with our current generation. It was passed on to us from those who came before, and it is for us to embrace it and pass it along to those who follow. Every generation faces its own challenges. Slavery was an issue for my great-grandfather's generation. Men were willing to die to bring about its end. For my parents, it was the Great Depression and the horrors of World War II. As I reared my own children and taught school myself, it was support for the public schools during school integration that included cross-country busing and pairing of schools. It does not take long to list the societal challenges today and what roles we might play. What challenges will you embrace? Listen carefully to the anthem that will be presented next. You will hear a message of our ancestors' visions for us. We Say, written by Issei Barnwell and performed by the Northern Light Chorale.
Thank you, Lollie. We're going to listen to a beautiful song anthem done by the Northern Lights Chorale. And it takes a minute to start up.